Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very thrilled again to welcome you back to our series of lectures on human rights and media tracking. This afternoon's lecture will be titled Gender, Human Rights and Media. So I think that we have covered so far almost all the important things about human rights agenda. We have also talked about the role of mass media in advocating for human rights, in monitoring human rights, protecting human rights all over the world. We have also tackled human rights and children this morning, and we have been introduced to international treaties, institutional frameworks that, of course, concern the development of human rights all over the world. Today, of course, we're going to deal with very important, sensitive topic, talking about gender, talking about women's rights movement, which I do believe a very important issue. So today's lecture focuses on two fundamental yet deeply interconnected themes: human rights, of course, and the feminist movement within the framework of gender equality. We're going to explore the historical development of feminist movements, their contributions, for example, to expansion of human rights, ongoing challenges faced by societies globally. So these struggles are deeply intertwined. So human rights and gender equality, they are deeply intertwined, they are deeply amalgamated with issues of gender equality, issues of justice, and the universal recognition of human rights. So that will be the focus of our lecture today. So these are, of course, the major objectives and an overview about the purpose and the aim of this lecture, which I do believe a very important one. So we are going to see historical background of the feminist movement. We are going to see some women pillars of the feminist movement, women's rights movement. We are going to see also some background knowledge about women, philosophers, intellectuals, and civil activists. Introduction to human rights and gender. So we are going also to focus on the CEDAW, or the Convention on the Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women. So we are going to tackle also this issue and be introduced to rights of women. The second issue is that we are going to focus on some core concepts like gender roles, relations, and identity. We're going to see, for example, concepts like patriarchy, masculinity, and we're going to define them. Yes, so also we're going to deal with the role of media in gender representation. So you see, this is a very also crucial topic. We cannot deal with human rights without, of course, dealing with how gender is either represented or misrepresented on media. So this is also something very crucial to us, that we are going to deal with it and plumb its depth. Gender also sensitivity in media language. We are going to see this interplay in media language, and how sometimes we face stereotypical images, stereotypical linguistic images on mass media, unfortunately. We are going to focus on the CEDAW, and international gender rights. So this is something also very important, to be introduced to the rights of women and consult international treaties, of course, postulated by the United Nations. So these are the objectives of our lecture that we will attempt to cover in this lecture. We're going to see now prominent figures of the feminist movement, which I do believe they have really influenced, they have impacted the feminist movement worldwide. And they are very important figures, feminist figures. So we are going to get introduced to Mary Wollstonecraft, to Simone de Beauvoir, to Betty Friedan, to Kate Mayer, to Olympe de Gouges. So I do believe that the dialogue around women's rights is both global and multifaceted, with ongoing debates about representation, equity, justice. From literary works, this is literary works, it's very important, intellectual works. So from literary works to political treaties, intellectual contributions continue to shape and redefine what it means to champion women's rights. And these women, of course, have already championed women's rights, intellectually speaking, literally speaking, and even in civil activism. They make a dynamic area of social, academic, of course, inquiry. So I do believe that these figures, they have really influenced the history of women's rights. So therefore, we're going to see what are their ideas. We're going to get introduced to their ideas, and at the same time, we're going to see to what extent they have influenced the feminist movement and what is their trace on this feminist movement. To what extent they have, globally speaking, impacted the women's rights movement, because this is something very important. And why for example I have opted for these intellectual figures, because I do believe that the intellectual movement is very important. But we cannot just rely on civil movements. Yes, sometimes even the intellectual movement leads and paves the way for civil activism. Without literature and without the intellectual writings, for example, literary writings, or literary corpus, so we cannot have a very healthy civil activism, especially talking about women's rights. So we all know to what extent these figures, of course, have influenced the feminist movement. So let's step by step, for example, deal with those figures. And in dealing with those figures and with the feminist movement in general, so we know that feminism has been, of course, developed through many phases, the many waves and stages. The first stage feminism, second, third, and so on and so forth. But I have divided feminism into early feminism, and I have, of course, investigated on those women who have been pioneers of this feminist movement. And of course, among them is Mary Wollstonecraft. Of course, Mary Wollstonecraft, she, of course, she was very famous, especially at the 18th century. She was an English writer, philosopher, and advocate for women's rights. She is widely recognized for her pioneer work, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. So this is a book published in 1792. In which she argued that women should be afforded the same educational opportunities as men, positioning herself as a key figure in the early feminist movement. So her work in general, or grosso modo, laid important groundwork for later discussions on equality, justice, education, gender rules, for example, gender disparities, and so on and so forth, challenging deeply, of course, patriarchal misrepresentations, and challenging deeply what was ingrained, in her society, or what was deeply ingrained in her societal norms, of course, of her time. So this book, I do believe, is of paramount, of course, importance. And I have here, in order to clarify things for you, so you have a quotation from chapter 2. So she claims that, contending for the rights of women, my main argument is built on the simple principle that if she be not prepared by education, it means the woman, if she not be prepared by education to become the companion of men, she will stop the progress of knowledge and virtue. So you see, this is a very influential quote by Mary Wollstonecraft. So Mary Wollstonecraft was a pioneer woman in contending and in defending women's right to education. So she claims that education is really a very groundbreaking rule, that the woman cannot reach virtue, the woman cannot reach noble missions, cannot perform her duties well if she hasn't, of course, the right of she or she if she doesn't. Of course, enjoy the right to education. So according to her, education, this is the first thing that women, of course, should enjoy. But you should know here why, for example, Mary Wollstonecraft emphasized this question of education, because of course at that time women were ignored, okay, and were denied this right, the right to education. So this is something which according to Mary Wollstonecraft is very important. Maybe nowadays you may say, well, so we have gone beyond the right to education, we should demand and we should fight for other things. Yes, okay, this is true, but still, even nowadays in some rural areas, some girls, for example, we have talked about children's rights, be they girls or boys, but still in some rural areas, for example, maybe all over the world, in many countries all over the world, still some girls, they still suffer and they are denied this right to education, unfortunately speaking. And even worse, in some areas, for example, you find that they favor boys, and the boy can have this right to go to school, but the girl cannot. And this is, of course, what causes what we call the the early marriage, okay, or the child marriage. So this is something also very very important, and at the same time we should pay attention to it. Another claim by Mary Wollstonecraft is that who is the mother of women's rights. So you see, this is how scholars and academicians label her. The minds of women are no different of the minds of men. This is something very important according to Mary Wollstonecraft, because you see in ancient times, for example, so women they were very marginalized, and they were even considered that they are very inferior to men, and maybe they didn't even maybe they were even classified as they didn't have the same mind, okay, as men, okay, or as males. So this is also something that Mary Wollstonecraft came, okay, to tackle it and to shed light on it. But that only men and women differ in their bodies. So you see, according to her, both men and women, so they have the same mind. What does it mean? It means that they can think, they can create, for example, they can engage in many intellectual activities, they can also write, they can participate in politics, they can vote, for example, they can participate in all the domains, in social, economic, cultural lives of their own societies, of their own communities. So they can be very active. Why? Because they are like men, and they have the same mind like men. So they can think, okay, they can study, they can write, they can read, they can perform art, and so on and so forth. They can be intellectuals, philosophers, writers. This is something that Mary Wollstonecraft asserts and confirmed. So therefore, according to her, but that only men and women differ in their bodies. So the difference, this is just a physiological difference. And this is another thing that Simone de Beauvoir, for example, is going to confirm later on in her book, The Second Sex. So you see, from the very beginning, we know and we notice that those scholars, for example, those pioneer women who advocated for the rights of women, from the very beginning, we see to what extent they confirm and they urge people to recognize women's rights and equality, especially. There is also another figure, as I have already explained. It's Olympe de Gouges. Also, Olympe de Gouges, the rise. She symbolizes the rise of a feminist political manifesto. How? Because she published. I have already talked about the Declaration of the Rights of the Citizen. Okay, it means men, because in that declaration it was meant just according to the feminists, it was meant to men. But according to Olympe de Gouges, published the Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen, not the male citizen. So this is for the female, published in 1791. Olympe de Gouges, of course, was a pioneer French writer, was a playwright and political activist, also, whose work and life have made her a powerful symbol in the history of women's rights, not only in France, but at the same time, of course, all over the globe. So you see, she is also remembered. She is remembered. This is the declaration. Of course, this is in the French language. Okay. So the Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen in 1791. So Olympe de Gouges also is remembered as one of the earliest, like Mary Wollstonecraft, advocates for gender equality, and at the same time a forerunner of modern feminism. Of course, she was a very courageous woman, and her courage challenged societal norms, and she demanded also equal rights for women. And she had inspired generations of feminists, and she was increasingly celebrated as a historical icon. Even nowadays, for example, she is at the time many times, of course, remembered as an iconic figure of feminism, like Mary Wollstonecraft, who was, of course, or who is even nowadays, we consider her as the mother of modern feminism, like many iconic figures that we are going to see. Well, so we will just see some quotations and some claims to be very concrete. So what does, for example, Olympe de Gouges say about women's rights? So according to her, women are born free and remain equal to men in rights. Social distinctions may only be based on common utility. So again, if we examine, for example, or these things, so we will, for example, know to what extent all these women, so they have the same, maybe they are on the same wavelength, they have the same ideas about gender equality, about setting up justice. So you see, from the very beginning, so women are born free. So where they are slaves many times, where they are marginalized, where they are silenced. So see, these are the questions that, for example, many militants all over the world ask. So they are equal to men from scratch, from the very beginning. Social distinctions may only be based on common utility. It means the social distinction, they are not innate, but it depends on the common utility. Maybe we find women ministers, yes, that's fine. Maybe they have a very high status quo in society. Yes, we can have like a man, for example, prime minister. So it depends on the common utility, for example, in society and in their communities. There is also this quotation by Olympe de Gouges: "The sex that is superior in beauty, as it is encouraged during the pains of childbirth, recognizes and declares, in the presence and under the auspices of the Supreme Being, the following rights of woman and the female citizen." This is the first thing that is mentioned in the declaration. Is that this means that it serves as a powerful introduction where de Gouges redefines the notion, of course, of courage and strength. You see, so the sex that is superior in beauty as it is in courage. It means that women are very beautiful, and at the same time they enjoy beauty and courage. So this is a redefinition of courage, associating it not with only physical beauty, but it is also the unique resilience displayed by women, particularly in enduring, of course, childbirth, because women are very powerful indeed. So you see, this is what is claimed by Olympe de Gouges. So by framing women as courageous, she directly challenges prevailing views that associated men with strength and leadership. arguing that women are equally, if not more courageous. So this is something which is very, very important, you see. So sometimes we just say that, well, so leadership is just stuck to males, okay, and not to women. But here there is another story, okay. So it's rethinking, redefining the concept of courage and the beauty. So this is grosso modo the what Olympe de Gouges had postulated years and years ago when she published the Declaration of the Rights of the Female Citizen. Well, so here we are going to see, as I have said, when we talk about feminist movement, we talk about waves of feminism. Now let's begin with the first wave feminism. We're going to see, of course, its characteristic. So one of the main characteristics of this early or the first wave feminism is the suffragist movement. So as you see here, this is what characterized most, of course, especially in the late 19th and 20th century. This is what characterized the first wave feminism is the suffragist movement. It was a significant and influential campaign, okay, that began in the late 19th century, 20th century, that fought for women's right to what? To vote. So this is something that was very groundbreaking at that time. It originated primarily in the United Kingdom and the United States, where women there, so they were very activists, known as suffragists, mobilized to demand political, for example, equality in democratic processes. That was the major thing that women demanded at that time and advocated or mobilized for. So they galvanized in order to get the right to vote. So this movement led to the foundation for women's rights globally and contributed significantly to social political reforms regarding gender equality. So, like Emmeline Pankhurst, for example, she was a prominent British activist and leader for this suffragist movement. So there are, of course, many leaders. Suzanne also Anthony, so she was also a key leader of this suffragist movement, and of course, this suffragist movement helped women to just enjoy global political rights, okay, and that was of course their demands. It's to get political rights, political participation in decision making, and even nowadays, still women are galvanizing in order to get this right. This is also something very important. There was also another figure, Alice Paul, also another prominent figure, American. She's an American, of course, suffragist, known for her role in organizing the National Women's Party and advocating for more confrontational tactics in the suffragist movement. So these women, for example, so you see even the picture symbolizes to what extent women they were together. This is something very important in women's struggle. So they are together, and they are, of course, they were at that time demanding or advocating for the right to vote. So you see, so they march together in order to get, of course, that right, and they successfully almost to get the political right and the right to vote. Well, so this is maybe the most important thing that characterized first wave feminism, among many other issues, of course, but I have just focused on the major thing, because you see the history of women's movement is very, very long and very detailed, okay, all over the world. But of course, many scholars and academicians, so they have like resumed, okay, this feminist movement into waves in order to be very, very concise. Of course, this second wave, as you see, second wave feminism, this wave, of course, spanned from 1960s to 1960s, 1980s. It marks a transformative period in the women's rights movement. So it was a radical movement really at that time. Unlike the first wave, which was primarily like focused on legal rights, like the suffragist movement, like right to education. These are like a primary step, okay, from which women began to advocate for their rights. But later on, of course, there was development. There was like a refinement in their movement. So what we can say about the second wave is that unlike the first wave, this second wave broadened the scope to address social, cultural, reproductive, and economic inequalities. So women here, like um, they started to galvanize to advocate for more rights, aiming for a deeper restructuring of society between men and women. It's like setting up an equilibrium between men's rules and women's rules, and they started to just maybe talk about or galvanize or advocate for social, cultural, political rights in an organized way. And at the same time, alongside the civil activism of women, there was at the same time an intellectual movement. There was like the emergence, the rise of the of women's intellectual movement, and that this thing was very important, and it had influenced the process of women's development, of women's rights development. Like what? Like Simone de Beauvoir, for example. This is Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, especially published in 1949. It was really a seminal work, an outstanding work that was published in the mid 20th century, and it has had a great impact on the feminist movement. So you see, in the second text, I will just give you now an overview, but later on we are going to see, maybe to delve into the book, because this book is a milestone in women's intellectual movement, I do believe. So the Beauvoir seminal book, The Second Sex, as you see, critically analyzes the oppression of women, and it provides an in-depth exploration of women's historical and social roles. So it is an in-depth exploration of women's social and, of course, historical roles. It argues, it argues that women have been historically, of course, defined as the other. And this is something very important that even influenced post-colonial feminist writers, post-colonial women's writers, as we are going to see later on. This is something which is very important in the history of feminism. So according to Simone de Beauvoir, the woman was misrepresented, okay, historically speaking, and she was considered as the other in relation to men. She is the other to men. It's a theme that resonates deeply within the second wave feminism. And of course, the philosophical background, if you ask about Simone de Beauvoir, so of course she is an existentialist. And she was all the time with Jean-Paul Sartre. She had been influenced by the philosophy, or by the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. And therefore her book is so wonderful, because she tackles the question of gender, but from an existentialist point of view, an existentialist perspective. So de Beauvoir applied existentialist philosophy to the female experience, positing that one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. This is the major, maybe this quotation summarizes like the whole book. And this, by the way, this is a very famous saying. Wherever you say one is not born, but rather becomes a woman, so you just make allusion to Simone de Beauvoir. So this idea, really, it becomes, of course, a cornerstone for the second wave feminists, emphasizing that gender rules are constructed rather than innate. And this is, of course, this is like it's a radical. Simone de Beauvoir has made a radical change in the feminist movement, and of course in women's rights movement in general. As we are going to delve into some quotations, okay, said or claimed in that book in order to provide you with more illustrations. So this is just in general. So the second sex is a great manifesto of modern feminism, a foundational book in feminism and feminist studies. So this is therefore we all the time I emphasize that the intellectual movement does matter while tracing the development of women's rights throughout history. It is also an inspiration. Many women all over the world, many women writers, many women militants, for example, many women activists all over the world, so have been harshly, okay, influenced by and deeply influenced, inspired by this seminal writer and philosopher Simone de Beauvoir. So it is an inspiration to the activists of women's liberation movement. And it also, this book provides us with an important text of the second wave feminism. So sometimes, of course, we cannot talk about the feminist movement without mentioning the second sex, because later on, like for example Judith Butler and many prominent feminist figures later on, of course, we may say that they have been influenced by the second sex, especially when we talk about gender. That gender construction, it's not something innate, but it is constructed through society. Yes, so therefore we just say that one is not born. It means the woman is not born like a woman as we saw it marginal, as we see it, for example, or as we saw it in ancient times, marginalized, silenced, without any voice, and so on and so forth, inferior to man, inferior in society. No, but it's the woman. It's the society that renders the woman as such. It's the social construction. It's the social, for example, misrepresentation, the social stereotypical images that, of course, render women as such, as the other to men, as the other to, or as being very an inferior, for example, marginalized position regarding men. Another figure which I have also mentioned, and which I do believe, or who I do believe, of course, influenced and impacted, of course, the process and the development of women's liberation movement. Talking about the intellectual movement, as I have said, just to clarify things for you, we are talking about that there is, or what we are stemming from the argument that there is an interplay, okay, interplay between human rights, gender right, for example, or gender equality, and media. So we are going to tackle these issues in its maybe global sense, and at the same time in its inclusivity. We cannot divide them. So we have gender, human rights, and at the same time media. So this is like my argument. This is my argument today. So there is like an interplay between this trilogy of gender, human rights, and media. We cannot separate them, but we are going to deal with them in their inclusivity. Right. So let's continue. Another figure, for example, that of course a prominent figure that or who has influenced again the feminist or women's liberation movement is Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan, of course, died in 2006, so she is a modern writer. Betty Friedan published her wonderful book, The Feminine Mystic, in 1963. And this book really is so wonderful. It's outstanding, and in it, of course, Betty Friedan again has advocated for another rights, okay, to women. So Betty Friedan, of course, is an American, or was an influential American feminist writer, and she's also activist, best known for her groundbreaking seminal book, The Feminine Mystic. Also, her book is within within this second wave feminism. So her advocacy brought attention to issues such as gender roles, the workplace discrimination, and productive rights. So this is her major claim. She co-founded even the National Organization for Women in 1966. This organization also was very important in launching women's activism at that time and in shaping, of course, the agenda of modern feminism. So also this that movement, it aimed to achieve, of course, gender equality in both private and public sector, and this is something which is very important, of course, postulated by Betty Friedan. So this quotation, as you see, for example, here, this is taken from the book The Feminine Mystic. And this quotation maybe summarizes the argument in the book. It's the problem that has no name. So this is maybe the phrase that is very famous in that book. The problem that has no name, which is simply the fact that American women are kept from growing to their full human capacities, is taking a far greater toll on the physical and mental health of our country than any known disease. So you see, this is the problem that has no name. And later on in the book, so she would explain to what extent the woman is just reduced to the house, and she just performs one single task, one single job, is housework. And this is something, of course, according to Betty Friedan, that kills, of course, women, because these things, of course, they deprive women from performing her social, or their social, political, cultural roles within their communities. And this is the problem that has no name. That book was, of course, about American women in the United States. So let's see. So Friedan's book awakened women to their unhappiness and miserable life inside the house. So as I have said, this is the major claim postulated by Betty Friedan, is that this is the problem that has no name, is that women were like, this is her argument indeed, that women they are just imprisoned in the house, and they couldn't perform any social, cultural, political roles. They are reduced to one task, which is, of course, the housework. And this, of course, according to her, this causes the unhappiness, this causes women's trauma, this causes women's psychological health. Why? Because they are all the time performing the same task. Okay, so according to her, this is a quotation taken from the book, women who adjust as housewives, who grew up wanting to be just housewife, are in as much danger as the millions who work to their own death in the concentration camps. They are suffering a slow death of mind and spirit. So you see, this is a very influential, of course, quotation. And this is what of course Betty Friedan advances, is that when the woman is just made like a prisoner in the house, so of course this is like taking a journey to death. Step by step she dies. Why? Because if you don't nourish, of course, your mind with reading, sometimes even working when you don't work, so you become just lazy. And when you become lazy, so it's like you kill yourself, you kill your energy, you kill you kill your body, you kill your mind also. So this is what Betty Friedan, for example, is saying here. So according to her, this is her argument, that housework and performing the role of housewife is just killing women inside the house. So another even quotation by Betty Friedan: the key to the drop is, of course, education. So again, you see many times when we talk about scholars, philosophers, even civil activists, for human rights activists, so even ancient old philosophers, for example, they all agreed upon one thing, is that the key to get rid of many traumas, of many social, cultural, political problems, for example, the key to advocate for human rights is just to just get people educated. So education again is a powerful tool, okay? And but maybe all the scholars they agree upon it. And this is again another scholar, feminist, okay, who claims that education is the key to this trap, is the key to maybe save women from being prisoners inside the house, from being just performing one single job, which is just being a housewife, performing housework. The feminine mystic has made higher education for women seem suspect, unnecessary, and even dangerous. So you see, this is even dangerous. This is when you believe in this, so this is dangerous. When you believe that education, for example, higher education is not that necessary, this is dangerous also. So, so of course, this what we can, for example, learn from this quotation is that it's like it raises women's consciousness about the right to education, that and not just elementary education, but it means that women they should of course when they were girls, so they should get the right to elementary, for example, education, which is compulsory in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Elementary education is compulsory and mandatory for every girl and for every child. But at the same time, it's not enough for women. If you would like to just get rid of that trap, so you should continue. You should pursue your higher education. So this is it exactly, and this is why Betty Friedan claims that education for women, when they feel that education is suspect, they don't even need it. For example, why? Because they are just staying in the house performing housework, and while performing housework, they are dependent, and they depend on men. They depend on their husbands, and this is another dangerous story. So you see here. So this of course leads to many dangerous, of course, situations. But I think, according to Betty Friedan, but I think that education and only education, so you see the repetition of education. So I think that sometimes you may say that, oh, we are fed up with this education, that's it, okay? But anyway, this is even, I totally agree with her and with all the scholars, of course, who have advocated for the rights, of course, to education. This is something that we can't do without it. It's impossible. This is a priority. Well, so but I think education and only education, you see the repetition for emphasis, has saved and can continue to save. So education, it's not just about learning, but it will save you. It's about your future. It's about your entire life. It's about consciousness. It's about enlightenment. It's about creativity. It's about your place in your society. It's about establishing a very good status quo in society. And you cannot do that, okay, without education. It's impossible. It's the first step, okay, toward success, toward prosperity, and toward, of course, ascendancy in society. Well, so American women from the greater dangers of the feminine mystic. So you see, if you would like to get rid of that feminine mystic, if you would like, for talking to women, if you would like to get, for example, saved, so please, the key to that trap is being educated. So education is the first step, but it's the most important step, okay, towards successfulness, okay, and toward, of course, prosperity and resilience. Another prominent figure that I have shown to you in the first, from the very beginning of this lecture, is another maybe another perspective. We have talked now about education. We have talked about like how the woman shouldn't be misrepresented as the other of men and so on and so forth. The suffragist movement, and now there is another issue, which is politicizing feminism. And this politicizing feminism was, of course, advocated and was advanced by Kate Meyer, and she's also a modern, we may say modern feminist, because she died just in 2017. And she was, of course, an American feminist writer, artist, and actively widely recognized for her seminal book Sexual Politics, published in 1970. So this is a founding text of radical feminism. Why it is radical? Because in this book, of course, Sexual Politics, Kate Meyer, it's like she has paid more attention to politics and to political rights, and even to politicizing feminism. It means rendering what is personal into political. So this is something. This is maybe even her slogan, and this is something very important. So Meyer's work explored the intersections of gender, power, sexuality, and politics, challenging the structures that enforce patriarchal control. Her ideas profoundly influenced second wave feminism by questioning traditional power dynamics, for example, highlighting the ways in which cultural and societal norms oppress women. So, according to her, for example, we may read this quotation: when one group rules another, the relationship between the two is political. So you see, so this is her claim. So it means that sometimes even when we talk about women's marginalization in society, we take it just as a personal matter. No, it isn't. So this is according to Kate Meyer. So we should render what is personal into political. When such an arrangement is carried out over a long period of time, develops an ideology like feudalism, racism, for example. All historical civilizations are patriarchies. Their ideologies is male supremacy. So you see, this is according to her argument in that book, which was published in 1970. So you see here how she claims that we should, of course, render the question of women's oppression inside society a political issue. It's not that it's not just a personal thing that we can, for example, deal with it maybe at home. No, but it is very political, and society, of course, should assume its responsibility to get women their rights, okay, and to just not just this, but to debate those rights within the political framework of the society, not just let it separated from the political like framework, political agenda, but women's rights should be part and parcel of the political agenda. Yes, so we are going to see like examples. So this is maybe grosso modo the major argument in the sexual politics in this book. So extending the personal, as I have explained already, into political, denouncing the patriarchal power. It means the male supremacy. We're going to see this because, unfortunately speaking, still even nowadays. So you see this book published in 1970, but we may, for example, we may claim that even, for example, nowadays, so we face this, or there are many countries, for example, in which we can find patriarchy is very predominant. Even nowadays, we can't talk about patriarchy, and this is one of the major claims advanced in this book, is that patriarchal power dominates art, dominates literature, dominates all the social institutions in order to perpetuate men's supremacy over women. Unfortunately speaking, this is even what is happening even nowadays, not just in the 1970s. So, but still, women should continue, of course, to galvanize and to advocate for their rights. And this is something which is very important if we meditate this quotation. So we will see to what extent, like women, they are doubly victimized. So you see, even in literature, so we find patriarchy dominates art, and it dominates also history, not just art. Sometimes even we find that history denied or ignored the women. Sometimes when you read, for example, about ancient times, you don't you get a very astonished because you don't find any like trace, okay, about women. It's like women, they were invisible. And this is something also that is tackled, or we can even deduce it from this quotation. There is another thing that is postulated by Kate Mayet, is that patriarchy as an institution is a social constant so deeply entrenched as to run through all other political, social, or economic forms, whether of caste or class, feudality or bureaucracy, not just as it pervades all major religions. So you see, so here, of course, again, Kate Mayet, okay, emphasizes that patriarchy is everywhere. Patriarchy is very constant, and it is more than being constant. It is an institution itself. And when we talk about institutions, so you see to what extent this institution, of course, influences women's destiny and influences women's rights. So, and this patriarchy also, it is deeply entrenched. Sometimes we find it even within our families. You talked this morning, some students talked this morning about how there is that gender disparity from the very beginning. We live it between boys and girls, and this is something very important. Why? Because this is due to patriarchy. Even in our societies, okay, so in our maybe small societies, which is of course the family, in our families sometimes we find this prejudice and this bias. Sometimes we favor boys and we marginalize girls. So this is patriarchal society. And sometimes what is very dangerous here, maybe we can discuss it in the tutorial later on, is that sometimes you get very astonished because it's who brings up children? Women, okay, women bring up children, but women also, they are victimized. Why? Because this patriarchy is deeply sometimes entrenched in their minds. Why? Because they got very traditional sort of upbringing, very traditional education, okay. Why? Because this of course in many societies, because this serves of course the status quo of men, okay. So therefore they entrench those ideas into the minds of girls from the very beginning. When you say to the girl, no, you shouldn't do this, but the boy can do it. So here it's like you entrench and you consolidate patriarchy from the very beginning. And sometimes when the girl, for example, grows up, so she takes it as granted that she is inferior, and the boy is very superior from the very beginning, because this is due to the traditional education, traditional upbringing. Well, this is just between brackets an example to illustrate to you to what extent sometimes even we feel, okay, and we live within this institution of patriarchy, and how it is very perpetuated. It is perpetuated by institutions, sometimes even by political institutions, by social, by cultural, by artistic institutions, by literary institutions. Sometimes even when you read literature, you find to what extent that literature is very biased. To what extent, for even when you analyze a piece of literature, you find the woman or the heroine or the man is all the time the Superman, all the time the hero, and the woman is all the time in the house, all the time crying, all the time dependent, marginalized. This is patriarchy again. So this is why Kate Mead, for example, claims that patriarchy as an institution is a social constant, so deeply entrenched. It is entrenched, okay. It is deeply rooted, of course, in our families and in through political, social, economic forms, even artistic, even literary form. And this is something also that of course influences women's rights in general. Well, of course, from the 1970s, so we can talk about onwards, we can talk about um, like the development of feminism. So from the 1970s onward, feminism has, of course, started branching into different theoretical paradigms and ideologies depending on specific culture, history, and text. So here we underline the specific culture, specific history, specific text. And this is the context here does matter while dealing with women's liberation movement or even while dealing with women's rights. So the context is very, very crucial and very similar. We're going to see because feminism is not stopping. It's a continuous movement, and maybe even nowadays we talk about the post-feminist era. Okay, so it is a continuous unceasing process. So therefore we may talk about the third wave again. So we talked about early feminism, first wave feminism, second wave feminism, now third wave feminism, the urgency of intersectionality. This is what characterizes third wave feminism, as we are going to see with Kimberly Crenshaw, for example. Also, this is something very important, the fourth wave feminism, we can call it like this. It is, of course, characterized by digital activism. Now there is a very global networking among women all over the world, thanks to digital technology. So, and digital revolution indeed. Okay, so I do believe it has helped women's liberation movement a lot, and it has even helped us like make like a global networking. Well, and networking, so this is it exactly. So this is what characterizes fourth wave feminism. So this is very, you see a lot of branches into feminism, and even within, if we would like to go deeper, but because there are many things that we are going to deal with. So even within third wave feminism, so we can talk about Marxist feminism, liberal feminism, and so on and so forth. But of course, we're going to focus on the major thing. So this is, I do believe this is very important figure also, and she is a modern figure, a pioneer figure in the development of intersectionality. It's a concept that is introduced in the 1980s. I hope that I don't know if you know this woman, Kimberly Crenshaw, okay? So she's an Afro-American, and she's widely known for her concept of intersectionality. So according to her, so this woman really also has influenced the process of the feminist movement. Her work is foundational to understanding how various forms of discrimination, and this is what is it. I do believe that this relates to us as being from the continent of Africa, as being from the continent of Asia. Okay, so you see, she tackles how various forms of discrimination, such as race, class, sexuality, how they intersect and they compound, particularly in the experiences of marginalized groups, not only women, but all marginalized groups. Even we can talk, for example, about children. So this woman, okay, Kimberly Crenshaw, is not directly associated with this wave of feminism, but it's still okay. It continues even with the fourth feminist, for example, wave. It continues with her feminist discourse. Why? Because her concept really, the concept of intersectionality, and this is a concept that we are going to see, for example, in post-colonial discourse. So Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality, we may label it, or we may call it a cornerstone of contemporary feminist thought. Why? Because it reshapes both third wave and fourth wave feminism by promoting an inclusive, multidimensional approach of feminism. And this is something very important, not just of feminism, but of gender and social justice. So her work underscores the importance of acknowledging, addressing people with intersecting identities. This is something very important. And as I have said, this relates to us as Moroccan people, as Indian people, as African, Asian in general, because we have this intersectionality in our communities. So this woman, of course, strive for true inclusivity. This is something very, very important. So this woman influences, or this woman's influence is not just is seen not only in academic legal fields, for example, no, but it also in grassroots activism, where intersectionality has become essential framework for understanding and combating systems of inequality. So this is something very important. And if you would like to go deeper into Kimberly Crenshaw, so please you can go to her landmark paper or article published in 1989, and that paper is entitled Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, in which this woman, this pioneer figure, okay, illustrates how African American women's experiences they were neglected in feminist agenda and in anti-feminist frameworks in general. Why? Because they primarily address these issues isolated categories. Okay, sometimes they address race alone, sometimes they address gender alone. But according to her, no, we should address them intersectionally. They are all these concepts. They are very intersected and they are very overlapped. And I'm going to explain to you later on. So according to her, this is just grosso modo about what Kimberly Crenshaw, okay, postulates. If we aren't intersectional, some of us, the most vulnerable, are going to fall through the cracks. So you see, if you, for example, if you have access to her video, so you will understand and you will assimilate profusely her argument, because she advances a very important argument that when we tackle, for example, when we should talk about women's rights, marginalized groups' rights in general, so we should tackle them in their, for example, inclusivity, that they in that race, class, sex, for example, they are all overlapped, they are all intersectional, we cannot separate them. So this is just a quotation by Marlene Lee Gates. The beauty of this movement, this is just describing the feminist movement in general. So the beauty of this movement of ours is that it is so fluid, ever moving, evolving, growing. If we devoted every page of every issue for the next 22 years to describing the many ways you are putting feminism into practice, we still wouldn't come close to covering it all. So you see here. So this movement is very fluid. It's ever moving. It's evolving, and it is divided into many branches. Okay. So but you see, if you devote maybe every page, every issue, okay, for the 22 years to describing this movement, you cannot. But we still, of course, we should try to cover, of course, all women's issues, and we should get close to each other. We will a little bit here shift to something else. It's all the time feminism, but this time this feminism will be related to what we call post-colonial feminism. And this again, I opt for post-colonial feminism because it's all the time, it's about defending women's rights in former colonies, defending women's rights in countries, for example, which experience colonialism and imperialism. And I'm going to explain to you that really sometimes we talk about defending women's rights, but it becomes very hard when we talk about former colonies, when we talk about countries that experience imperialism. And the colonial condition wasn't that easy for many countries all over the world. Anyway, so this is another type which I do believe very, very important. So we're going to see this overlapping between Western feminist discourse, which I call it master feminist discourse, and post-colonial discourse. So of course, when we talk about post-colonial feminism, we emphasize the need to understand how different systems of oppressions, for example, exist. We talked about like colonialism, imperialism. We can talk also about racism, sexism, classicism, and how all these concepts, for example, these different systems, how they intersect. So therefore, universalizing the tendencies of mainstream feminism that often center the experiences of white Western women. So this feminism, this post-colonial feminist discourse challenges this universalization of the status quo or of the situation of women. So why? Because it sometimes it stems from the Western feminism, but it criticizes Western feminism, and it attempts also to go beyond Western feminism. It is a critique against Western feminism, especially for its tendency to portray women in the global South, for example, as oppressed victims in the need of saving. And we are going to see, for example, like Gayatri Spivak's seminal essay, "Can the Subaltern Speak?" But anyway, post-colonial feminist discourse um, argues that of course there is this question of agency and resilience, or even diverse experiences of these women, that they are not, or they can be even perpetuated, okay, in new colonial attitude. And this is also something that is postulated by post-colonial feminism. So it's a critique against Western feminist discourse, which I call master feminist discourse, but at the same time it stems from it, and it sometimes it even overlaps with it. But what is good about post-colonial discourse is that this approach, it's like it helps us understand women's rights and gender issues, listen, within specific historical, cultural, and socio-political context. As I have said before, we should underline the specificity of context, the specificity of culture, and the text. So this is something very important, even postulated by post-colonial feminist discourse. It seeks to elevate the voices of women in post-colonial societies and recognize the importance of their perspectives in discussions about gender equality. So this is the measure, of course, claim postulated by post-colonial feminist discourse. We are going to see many illustrations later on, and many examples. But what concerns us here is that when we talk about women, like women's rights, for example, women's liberation movement, even feminism nowadays. So we can talk like in Africa. So there is like the rise of womanism, in order not to just repeat the word feminism. So they have invented womanism. So you see in many parts now in the world. Why? Because women, they would like to tackle their issue, taking into consideration their specificity of culture, values, norms, religious beliefs. This is what we mean by the context. This is something which is, I do believe it's very, very important. So as you see, so post-colonial feminism, defending women's rights in context. This is how I consider post-colonial feminism. It's defending women's rights in very specific context, taking into consideration the characteristics of indigenous people. So it is an indigenous counter discourse from inside rather than outside. When we talk about post-colonial feminism, for example, we can even talk like about decolonial feminism also now in Latin America. So there is that emergence, it's the emergence of decolonial feminism. So it is also negotiating the representation of women in former colonized countries. We are going to see some examples by some very prominent figures of post-colonial feminist discourse. Also, stressing the heterogeneity of the third world women. Western feminism homogeneous discourse. So you see, as I have explained to you before, and this is something which you should pay attention to, it is very important. Why? Because if we stem from, for example, post-colonial or Western master feminist discourse, yes, it's fine. We'll learn from Western discourse, feminist discourse, a lot of things. We have learned from women's movements all over the world, a lot of things. But still in post-colonial, for example, societies, so they have, again, talking about the rights. They have the right to advocate for their situation or for their position from their own context, from their own, for example, or following their own perspectives, their own paradigms of thought. And this is why when we talk about post-colonial feminism, it is an indigenous discourse. It comes from inside, not from outside. You see, also when we talk about post-colonial feminism, so it negotiates the representation. How women, for example, in former colonies, how they are represented by Western, for example, women's writers, for example. So this is it. So we analyze women's writings and so on and so forth, stressing also the heterogeneity, because the third world women, we cannot homogenize their experiences. Even we belong, for example, if we would like to make allusion to Edward Said's Orientalism, in which, for example, he divides the world into two polarities, okay, the West and the East, the Occident, the Orient. Yes, we can talk also like the third world women, Western women, yes, but we cannot, even within the Orient. The Orient, it's not homogeneous at all. We cannot talk about one Orient, no, because even within the Orient there are many countries, there are many cultural specificities, many religious beliefs. The same thing with the third world women. We cannot homogenize third world women in one and say, well, all women, for example, belonging to the third world, so they are suffering from this and that. No, maybe even their needs, they differ in their needs. Maybe they differ in the thing that they want, for example. So we should take this into consideration. At the same time, we shouldn't homogenize, okay. And this is something that is postulated by post-colonial feminists. We are going to see like Chandra Chalpadi Mohanty and many great thinkers who have again influenced post-colonial feminism. So you see here also, this is also tackled by post-colonial feminism. It's women's double colonization under colonialism and patriarchy. So as I have said, this is something also related to intersectionality. We cannot, when we talk about women like marginalization, we cannot talk about women's marginalization from one angle. No, especially talking about women whom, for example, or who experience colonization and imperialism. And we know when we talk about imperialism, we talk about the atrocities of colonialism. So women are doubly victimized because of colonialism, and at the same time because of patriarchy within their communities. So you see, let alone race, let alone sex, let alone ethnic group, let alone the color of their skin, and so on and so forth. So you see to what extent this post-colonial feminism, to what extent it attempts to tackle all these issues. We are going to see major post-colonial feminists, like for example the Indian scholar Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak. I like her essay really, and I have worked a lot on her seminal essay Can the Subaltern Speak. So I think that she is well known, and she is really an influential post-colonial theorist and literary critic, and she is best known for her concept, the subaltern, especially the marginalized voices in society that are often silenced. And I think she talks about the Sati woman in India and how she was silenced. So for us, for example, and for many scholars, so this is a very referential article. So Spivak critiques Western intellectual practices, and of course she even explores the challenges, okay, faced by oppressed groups in articulating their experiences. So she emphasizes the need for self-reflection, the need for self-reflection among scholars to avoid, of course, getting in the trap or reproducing again colonial power. So Gayatri Spivak's essay is really very seminal, and it is worth reading and investigating. There is also another figure. Okay, we'll move to Chandra Talpadi, okay, Mohanty. It's within the same context, within the same framework. Chandra Talpadi Mohanty also. She is a key, of course, influential figure of post-colonial criticism. She's a post-colonial scholar, and Mohanty critiques also Western feminism for one thing, for homogenizing the experiences of women worldwide, especially in the third world. In her known essay Under Western Eyes, if you would like to note it down, she argues against the portrayal of the third world women as universally oppressed, as universally victimized, emphasizing something which is very important, emphasizing the importance of considering cultural context, social context. So this is what I have said before. So Mohanty also advocates for transnational feminism. This is her argument, which is sensitive to diverse experiences and resists universalizing framework. So this is something which is very, very important. So I think that these two figures, of course, so they have really influenced the process or the development of post-colonial feminist discourse. Again, there is another, as you see here, another prominent figure, Oudou. She is, of course, a poet. She is essayist, and of course, she is an activist. Of course, Lourdes, as Kimberly Crenshaw, also, her work centers on this question of intersections of race, gender, sexuality. So this is grosso modo, okay, what she claims, and she's very interested in what she calls like self care as resistance. So this is like a key word, self care as resistance, and her powerful advocacy for embracing diversity and confronting injustice within feminist movements. And if you have read it before, so you will be you will know her very famous slogan that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. It means when you use the tools of the West, you will never, of course, manage, of course, to dismantle your house. It's impossible. So when you think, you should think from inside, not from outside. You should take into consideration your context, social context, your cultural context, your norm, your values, your virtues, and so on and so forth. So you see to what extent these people, for example, to what extent they have. Not just they have advocated for the rights of women, but they have they have set up perspectives. They have set up paradigms of thought, and this is something very important. So even if you would like to advocate for women's rights, you should know how you will advocate, and this how is really postulated by those feminist figures. So we know how to defend and how to deal with the third world women, for example. How can we define our rights as being women, but at the same time taking into consideration our specific context, for example. So we shouldn't imitate blindly what is imported from the West, and we just imitate it blindly and import it and work with it. No, but we should. I told you many times, even while dealing with mass media, that we should even filter the information all the time, and even reading literature and so forth. We should filter. Right. So you see that feminism is really too huge, too large, and it really takes, okay, or divides into many branches, but one thing which governs all these things is the woman. All these people, all these women, all these feminists, whatever they are, and whenever they were before, so they have one they are worrying about one thing, is that how to set up and how to advocate for women's rights, and how to guarantee all women all over the world, of course, their rights. And when they guarantee their rights, of course, they will guarantee resilience, happiness, perseverance, and welfare. So this is just some quotations taken by, okay, or said by Audre that to be more illustrative. It is a particular academic arrogance to assume any discussion of feminist theory without examining our many differences. So you see, and without a significant input from poor women, black and third world women. Differences between women should be considered and not ignored. So again, so it's the same thing that I have already emphasized. So of course, while defending women's rights, or while even writing about women's rights, we shouldn't ignore that women, they are very different. Maybe some women, they don't even suffer from poverty. Yes, some women, they don't need the right to, they don't even have this idea of maybe defending this right, because they have it already, okay, innately, maybe they have it. But other women in some areas, they are very poor, so they should galvanize, okay, to get this right. So you see the difference here. Also, we are different in color, we are different in geographical places, so we should take into consideration also the geographical place, the geographical space, while defending women. So women, they are different, but at the same time, this difference shouldn't be taken as like we should be divided. No, but you should understand this difference. It means while writing about women, we should take into consideration women's specificities, because each woman maybe needs something, okay, that another woman might not need, okay. So we see, so this is how we should take into consideration this difference. Again, theorizing gender from a post-colonial feminist perspective. So according to Spivak, we should unlearn the privilege to learn to speak to the historically muted subaltern women. The subaltern cannot speak. There is a typo here that we may rectify it later on. There is no space from which the sex subaltern subject can speak. So again, these are taken from Can the Subaltern Speak by Gayatri Spivak. So in which, of course, she talks about that women, like intellectual women, they should unlearn their privilege in order to speak on behalf of those marginalized women. Because sometimes, and this is what is very dangerous, sometimes, like intellectual women, they just like militant women, sometimes they go, they participate in, they organize manifestations, demonstrations, so on and so forth. This is very good, but sometimes they speak on behalf of those women. No, they don't have the right to speak on. It's like silencing those women. Okay, so each woman has a voice, and all women, they should be voiced, and they should speak, of course, their atrocities. They should speak what they feel inside, so they have a voice, so they shouldn't be silenced. So when you speak, so we should unlearn that privilege to speak on behalf of those marginalized women, so let them speak. Therefore, when Spivak claims that the subaltern cannot speak, sometimes we say, can the subaltern listen? If the subaltern cannot speak, but he or she can listen, yes. Okay, so sometimes it's very, this is a very complex issue, because this is what Spivak would like, for example, to trace, is that we should unlearn that privilege of speaking on behalf of the especially marginalized women. Okay, so this is also said by Gayatri Spivak. Clearly, if you are poor, black, female, you get it in three ways. It means you are victimized three times. And this is what is happening to women all over, not all over the world, but especially in the East. Okay, so let's talk about Africa and Asia, for example. So the woman is suffering from poverty. Women, they are suffering because they are women. They are suffering from patriarchy, from the patriarchal system, and at the same time, they are suffering because of their skin color. These are some illustrations from Under Western Eyes by Chandra Talpadi Mohanty. So she claims that analyzing the production of third world women as a singular monolithic subject in Western feminist texts, third world women are represented in Western feminist discourse as being a homogeneous group deprived from power and agency. So of course she argues against this, that the women shouldn't be, of course, considered as homogeneous, as monolithic. So I have already explained, of course, her ideas. That woman is still defined, but this is her words. That woman is still defined from the perspective of Eurocentric assumptions. So of course, either Spivak or even Chandra Talpadi Mohanty, so all these post-colonial feminists, so of course they criticize Eurocentric paradigms of thought, Eurocentric perspectives and assumptions, and of course what is the question that we should raise, for example, that if we criticize Western feminism, for example, or Western universal aspect of feminism, this is something very healthy, and we do appreciate it. But the problem, what is the alternative that we can provide? So this is a question that we can take it over maybe in our tutorials. Women's rights movement, a path forward. So what I may say here, for example, is that there is feminism even nowadays. That women's liberation movement a continuous process. It never stops. Okay, and we may say that women, of course, struggled in the past. They are still struggling in the present, and we hope that they will stop struggling even in the future. I hope that they will gain all their rights and they will live in peace, prosperity, and resilience. Well, so we may say that all these intellectual movements, for example, even the civil movements like the feminism, the feminist movement, they have led, of course, to something which is very important, the United Nations endeavor also. This is something very important that impacted the women's liberation movement. So the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It was launched in 1979, and this is a milestone document in the history of women's rights. This is like an international bill of rights for women. Okay, the CEDAW legally binds ratifying countries to eliminate discrimination against women in all forms. It covers areas including education, employment, healthcare, family law, and more, requiring states to adopt gender equal legislation. So you see, this is something very, very important in the history of women's rights. At the same time, there is also the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. This is also very important, and it was thanks to the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing marked a significant moment in the global feminist movement also. This Beijing Declaration, as you see, it emerged in 1995, and it outlined 12 critical areas for women's rights, again including poverty, education, health, violence, and decision making. It set up a global agenda for gender equality. So you see, these are very important, very crucial documents that, of course, paved the way for women's rights development. United Nations Women also coordinates global global effort, like what you are going to see here, United Nations Women, and it emerged in 2010. This also consolidate and strengthen. It consolidates, of course, um, and it supports also the implementation of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against women. So this is also very the United Nations Women. This organization or this document is also very crucial. We are going to see some articles to be very concrete and some examples to what extent, of course, this convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and to see what is the most important, what are the most important articles in it. Well, so we will read just. I'm focusing here on Article 1, 2, 3 because I do believe they are of paramount importance. But we can, for example, later on, if we have time, we can discuss other articles. So, Article 1, definition of discrimination. Discrimination against women is any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex which has the effect or purpose of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise by women, irrespective of their marital status, on the basis of equality of men and women, of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, and any other field. So you see, this is mentioned in the in the CEDAW. So, and I think that it's very clear that, of course, women shouldn't, of course, experience any kind of distinction, any kind of discrimination in their communities, even within their small families, or even in their nations or in their societies. Article 2, policy measures should be to be taken. Um, Governments condemn discrimination against women. So there are even like penalties. So, or punishment. Condemn discrimination against women in all its forms and will work to end it. This includes abolishing all existing laws, customs, and regulations that are discriminatory. And of course, many countries all over the world they have ratified, of course, this document, and they adopted, of course, their national laws or regional laws with this universal declaration, this universal law. Article 3, guarantee of basic human rights. Governments will take all appropriate actions to ensure the advancement of women and to protect their rights on a basis of equality with men. So you see here, even for example, when we talk about human rights, sometimes we say women's rights are human rights. This is it exactly. So just to save us from all this confusion, because everything that is mentioned, and this is maybe the irony. Normally, everything that we saw maybe before yesterday, or yesterday we saw the United Nations declarations of human rights. Yes. So I think, and we have been even familiar with so many articles. So those what is mentioned in that declaration, it concerns every single person all over the world. regardless of sex, regardless of gender, regardless of ethnic group, of skin color, regardless of nationality, regardless of age. Also, you see, because even the declaration, it concerns women, it concerns men, it concerns children also. But the problem is that, and as we have seen, the problem is that the declaration when it was published, or when it was, for example, declared, it didn't have the force of the law. It wasn't a legal document, okay, that should be forced on countries. So therefore, later on, in order to solve this problem, each time the United Nations, of course, invent some treaties, international institutional bodies, frameworks. Why? To just urge countries to follow, of course, what is mentioned in that declaration. And among them, we have seen many international covenants, like on civil, political rights, social, cultural rights, and so on and so forth. And now this is another convention again, okay, to just end and prohibit discrimination for 100% against women. We have also seen the CRC, okay, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So those conventions, they are just the outcome of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, but the pillar, the cornerstone is that declaration. Well, as I have said before, the title of this lecture is Gender, Human Rights, and Media. And I have emphasized this question, that we cannot deal with gender or human rights without media. So this is a trilogy, okay, that we are going to shed light upon it. So gender, human rights, media, this is like what we call an intersection of gender, human rights, and media. This is the thing that we are going to look at, and how gender impacts like human rights, the portrayal of gender in media, and how media can either challenge or reinforce stereotypical images, stereotypical misrepresentations of women. This is something very important. We'll also touch on key concepts like what? Like gender roles, for example, like patriarchy, masculinity, and gender sensitive language. So this is something very, very important. So we are going to see human rights this time, human rights violations, but this time from a gendered lens. So these are the key concepts that we are going to deal with. So gender roles, it refers to or refer to society's expectations of behaviors and responsibilities based on one's gender. For instance, men are often expected to be providers, while women are expected to be nurturers. So you see, so this is gender roles, and sometimes this we just feel that sometimes there is like violations here, as we have seen before, that women all the time they are reduced to the housework, for example, but leadership, supremacy is related, or they are related to male. So this is gender rules, and sometimes even civil militants or feminists, okay, they of course they struggle in order to end those classical gender rules. Gender relations involve how different genders interact and the power dynamics within these relationships. Like patriarchy, for instance, influences these dynamics. Gender identity is, what does it mean, gender identity? So here I'm just giving you some definitions in order to understand when we talk about gender rules or gender relations or gender identity, is one sense of their gender, which may or may not alien and with their biological sex. While some people identify strictly as male or female, others fall on a spectrum or identity as non-binary. So this is what this is gender construction, the social construction of gender within our societies. Patriarchy is a system in which men hold more power and dominate in roles of leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control. So I think that you are very familiar with patriarchy because we are living within the sediments of this patriarchy. Well, so masculinity traditionally implies traits like strength, competitiveness, and stoicism. But contemporary gender studies recognize that masculinity is evolving. So these are just some definitions that you may use, and even you can now you understand them. Sometimes I will be using maybe gender rules, gender identities, so that you can have, for example, an idea about these concepts. So Judith Butler, when we talk about gender, so Judith Butler has, of course, spent a lot of time writing about gender, writing about the social construction of gender in her Gender Trouble, in her book Gender Trouble. So gender is not something that is one, according to her. It is something that one does. It's an act, a doing, rather than a being. So this is just to give you more examples and to crystallize your understanding about gender. Now we are going to move to something, but it's all the time related to gender. But this time it's gender and media representation. As I have said, the interplay between this trilogy, human rights, gender, media, this is very, very important. And if we examine, for example, the role of media, and I think that I have already tackled the issue in the lecture of media tracking, but I'm going to now relate it to the question of gender, not just human rights in general, but gender specificities in a very particular way. So you see here, there is this overlapping that we can, for example, see in media. Typecasting media limits individuals based on stereotypes. For instance, women are often like shown as caregivers or homemakers or just housewives, for example. So this is typecasting, okay? And as you see, it's or another, for example, like even for example, we may even deduce this in television commercials. For example, I'm going to provide you with examples from the Moroccan context, from advertisements. Okay, this is something very, very important. So this type casting reinforces narrow definitions of what men and women should be, like in TV shows, for example, in movies, sometimes in news reports. So men, they are depicted as being ministers, as being doctors, sometimes scientists, and so on and so forth, while women, they are just likely to be like nurses. If the man is the doctor, the woman is just a nurse. So you see here how this typecasting, for example, there is also this question of a catalyst for change. The media, because sometimes the media oscillates between either advocating for, monitoring, caring for rights. This is something very important that we can even decipher. But sometimes we find that the media is very biased. The media is sometimes is not, it's very subjective, it's not neutral. We saw yesterday, we're analyzing that article from the Independent, to what extent the media can be very, very biased. So you see, but sometimes the media can be the most powerful tool for either reinforcing or challenging gender stereotypes. So it can be. Um, in recent years, for example, we are going to see examples from the Moroccan context. We have seen effort to challenge traditional gender norms and encourage a more balanced representation. So you see, media is really is a double-edged sword. So we can, for example, describe it as such. We are going to see also something which is very important: gender sensitivity, gender and sensitivity in language also of the media, not just in media, even in literature, in poetry, in drama. We should pay attention to the language. And I think that If you would like to get deeper into this question of the language, so the book will come to my mind later on. It's the feminine ink. I think it's the feminine writing. If okay, the title of the book is coming to my mind. I will tell you to just consult that book in order to have more information about this question of language and of the white ink. We call it the white. I think that by Ellen Sixos, she calls it the white ink. It means that the woman should have her own language and should write with her white ink, okay, in opposition to the male black ink, okay. So this is just maybe if we have time we can deal with this book. Good. So language matters in shaping our perceptions. Media can either perpetuate bias, you see, either it can perpetuate bias through language or work towards gender sensitivity by using inclusive terms and avoiding stereotypes. We're going to maybe in another lecture we're going to talk about the ethical perspective of the mass media, and at that time we will delve into this topic in a very detailed way. Examples of gender sensitive language examples, so you have like fireman, policeman, and so forth. So in order to get rid of this, so please use neutral term like fire fighter, police officer, in order not to have this man, woman, and so forth, okay. This helps, of course, remove unnecessary bias. Women's rights violation and media representation. So this is I don't have we don't have access to this, but anyway I will just talk to you about that, how media, for example, sometimes it plays a very pivotal role in depicting women's rights. If you have time later on you can copy this website in order to read to what extent media, for example, plays a very interesting role in detecting, okay, women's rights violations. Okay, so here you will find how women, of course, especially Moroccan women, how they criminalize, of course, some some laws, okay, because the question of rape, for example, isn't defined, okay, in Moroccan law. Okay, so you can solve the website later on, and you will see how this is a national survey on violence against women in Morocco. Well, so this is this website. If you consult this article, for example, you will find that media is a powerful tool in detecting women's violations. Okay, and it helps removing that violation. But at the same time, we have another, as I have said, the media is a double-edged sword. We have another example. You see, perpetuating stereotypical images of women. So you see most of the time in advertising, in TV shows, so you see the woman is reduced to just the house, okay, but just cooking, okay. This is the job. You see also either cooking or housework in general. So this is even a stereotypical image of the woman. It should be vice versa. Yes. This is also another thing um, of advocating for the rights of women. So you see, this article is for advocating of the rights of women, and this article, this picture is from this article, advocating for the rights of Moroccan women, because you see, this picture is very symbolic. You see and even in our course books, sometimes at school when we studied, so we have all the time that my father is reading a newspaper and my mother is like cooking in the kitchen. So this is a stereotypical image, and sometimes it is all the time entrenched in our mind. So media here is sensitizing people. Media, or this article, is against this stereotypical image, and is sensitizing Moroccan people that it's not good to perpetuate such an image. And you see here the girl is learning what? Is learning that the role of the father in the house is very suffering. is just reading, it's intellectual good, while the mother is just housework. So later on, maybe the girl will imitate, of course, this function of the woman. Media advocating for the rights of women. So of course there are many, beside even Morocco, there are many like global organizations like Me Too movement. So the Me Too movement, say her name also. Me Too movement began in 2017. It is an example, of course, again, how social media can highlight gendered human rights, of course, violations. So sometimes the media really we do need it because it helps us detecting women's rights violations, especially when we talk about sexual harassment and assault. Also, there is this. Say her name also, this is another movement, okay, which is of course in the United States of America. And this phrase, say her name, it was also said by Kimberly Crenshaw. Okay, she said it in if you watch her videos, for example, and she utters many names of many militant women, and nobody knew, okay, those women. So therefore, she said she just did this hashtag, okay, say her name. So these are of course many global organizations, of course, that sought to defend, of course, women's rights all over the world. This is something which is very important, globally speaking. Well, so I think that we have covered the history of women's liberation movement, and we have seen how feminism, of course, developed and contributed to the development of women's rights, and how there is that interplay, okay, between human rights, gender, and media. So this trilogy is very important to defending women's rights in general. Okay, we have also seen some very local cases from Morocco, even from post-colonial feminism. How we should, if we would like to defend our right, we should do it from inside and not from outside. Also, these are global movements that we can, for example, see, and we can even rely on, okay, to defending women's rights. So we come to the end of our lecture. These are, of course, the references for the ones who would like, for example, to get deeper to to this uh, to this question. Well, so thank you very much. So tomorrow we are going to cover other topics and other lectures.